You will hear an incredible story in this video with its facts and photos, which I will publish today. In short, in 1974 in Berlin, during the Soviet occupation of East Germany, something unbelievable happened. The phone rang in the Stasi office in 1974. The Stasi was one of the most powerful offshoots of the Soviet Union's security system. Its activities were closely linked to Moscow, and its methods and structure were directly based on the KGB model. The Stasi, which controlled everyone and everything, had 1/50th of the population as Stasi agents or informants. The Stasi archives contain files about citizens that were 111 kilometers long. Special agents opened envelopes and analyzed even the smell of the paper to identify the recipient. Now, let's get back to the phone call. It rings in the main office of the East Berlin police, and a middle-aged woman's voice is heard on the line, giving information to a Stasi officer. According to this woman, a man, about 45 years old, who had just rented an apartment on Oderbrüche Street, was behaving quite suspiciously. When the woman was asked what she meant by acting suspiciously, she replied that he had no contact with anyone and always carried a black suitcase, walked with his head down, did not make contact with anyone, and wore strange shoes. Naturally, this statement was taken lightly by the Stasi, since similar absurd calls were made at least once a week. However, the Stasi had been strictly ordered by Moscow to check and respond to absolutely all information. When the woman was asked who she was, she hung up the phone. 3 days later, on September the 3rd, 1974, Stasi agents went to Oderbrüche Street to check this person out. When they arrived at the address and went up to the second floor, they knocked on the door, but no one answered. The agents went downstairs and waited on the street. As the woman had described to the agents, they had a rough idea of what this man looked like. The agents waited all day, but no one matching the description entered the building. The commander gave an order to leave the place and come back the next day in the morning. At 9 a.m., the agents appeared again at the address, went up to the second floor, and knocked on the door, but again no one answered. When the agents decided to enter the apartment, and after forcing the lock, the door still did not open. Suddenly, the agents heard a noise from the apartment and began to break down the door with force. From the outside, they heard the driver's voice, who was standing in the street waiting for the agents. The driver was shouting to the agents that the man was escaping through the window and trying to get to the roof. The agents stopped breaking down the door and tried to climb through the window of the entrance to get to the roof. The driver desperately yelled at the man to stop or he would shoot. However, the man escaped from the roof. 2 agents managed to climb onto the roof, but the man had already escaped. An alarm was raised. The East Berlin police arrived at the scene, as well as additional Stasi agents. When the Stasi driver was asked what the man was wearing, he replied that he was wearing a long cream-colored coat and a fedora-style hat. He was also carrying a small black case in his hand, but he could not make out his face. At this time, the door was broken down and the agents entered the apartment. After searching the apartment, they found nothing unusual except for a document with a small photo of a strange object and Russian text attached to it. One of the agents was Russian by nationality and was asked to translate the text. You can now see this document on the screen, as well as the translation in English. Everything interesting awaits you next. One of the Stasi officers went to question a neighbor to find out who the owner of the apartment was. The neighbor answered all the questions. Then, the owner of the apartment, whose name is Friedrich Koch, was summoned. He was interrogated. The owner of the apartment was asked to give a detailed account of who this person was. As Koch said, he had an advertisement in the newspaper where he was renting out the apartment. This person contacted him, and then the apartment was rented. The Stasi officer asked what the man's name was. Koch replied that his name was Roland, but he did not remember his last name. Koch was also asked what this man looked like. He replied that he was a man of medium height, with black eyes but a European type of appearance, with thinning hair in the middle, and almost always wearing a black fedora hat. During the interrogation, he also said that Roland told him that he worked in a laboratory. Koch also noted that he had a Slavic accent, and when he asked where he was from, he replied that he was from Russia and had been living in Germany for almost 10 years. He also said that he never missed a rent payment and that he had not noticed anything suspicious that he should have reported to the police. Based on Koch's description, a sketch of this person was made. A search was announced throughout East Berlin. The Stasi thought he was an American or British agent. For 2 months, no information was received by the police. And on November 27th in the morning, the phone rings at the police station and a man calls, giving information to the police that he sees a person who has appeared strangely and suspiciously moving around for almost 15 days. And he also stated that he looks like the person who is already wanted throughout East Germany. The place where this person was spotted was in the southern part of East Berlin, specifically in the Beisdorf area near Debenzer Street, near the Berlin Wall. The Stasi sent several of its agents to scout the area and conduct surveillance. They also met with the person who called the police station. He took them to the exact place where he had spotted the person who supposedly resembled Roland. Surveillance of this area began. At noon, a person appeared in a brown jacket and a warm hat, heading towards the Tierpark. The informant, along with the agents, pointed out that this was the suspicious person. The Stasi agents followed him secretly. This person sat down in the park, looking confused and looking around. The Stasi agents were not sure if it was Roland, as he was wearing a warm hat and his face was not clearly visible. He was being watched from a car with binoculars. At one point, he started smoking a cigarette, during which he took off his hat. And the description was quite similar to Roland. The agents were 80% sure that it was Roland. The agents contacted the head of the department by radio and reported what was happening. The head of the department asked the agents to wait for an answer and would contact them shortly and not to stop surveillance of this person. After about 20 minutes, this person left the park and headed back to Debenzer Street. The agents secretly followed him. This person entered the entrance of a 5-story building, which was half abandoned. One of the agents followed him, and when he entered the entrance, he saw that he went down to the basement. At this time, a message came over the radio, and the line was Erich Mielke himself, the then Minister of Security. And he informed the agents that he had personally taken over this case and that the agents should continue surveillance of this man for a few more days. 5 days later, Erich Mielke contacted the agents again and asked what the situation was. The agents replied that this man only had one route here. He comes out of the basement, goes to the Tierpark, stays there for a while, and then returns back and also buys groceries at a nearby store. Mielke ordered the agents to start the operation the next day and arrest this person. The next day, when this person came out of the basement and headed towards the Tierpark, 2 agents went down to the basement. Inside, there was an iron door with a padlock. They opened the padlock and entered the basement room, and 2 agents hid inside, and 2 more remained on the upper floor of the entrance. When this man returned, one of the agents called out his name from the side, Roland, at which point this man instinctively turned around. The agents immediately realized that it was 100% Roland. Roland ran towards the entrance but did not enter and ran out into the street. The agents ran out of the entrance and chased him, and they caught him very quickly. They immediately threw him into the car and put handcuffs on him. Also, 2 more Stasi cars arrived at the scene. At this time, 2 agents were already searching the basement. They found a black case which was full of documents, and there was also a small strange device in the case. Roland was taken to the Stasi department. At this time, the phone rang and Mielke was told about the operation and also about the case, which contained strange documents and photos. Mielke categorically demanded that no one but him interrogate Roland. The next day, Roland was put in a car and taken to Erich Mielke, where Roland's interrogation began. Mielke also reviewed the documents, which were in Russian. Mielke was quite fluent in Russian. He was amazed at what he saw in these documents. This document described the year in which Mars was colonized, as well as projects of the so-called Mars rovers, photos, as well as documents of other high-tech projects. Another capsule project that cured cancer. Capsules that could cure cancer in an hour. This was necessary because radiation was common on Mars, which caused cancer. Many other documents were also found. Mielke started asking questions and demanded specific answers about what all this meant, where this man came from, and who he was. The fact was that almost all his documents were in Russian, except for a few. Mielke thought it was some kind of Kremlin project, but he was completely confused. It turned out that this person's name was Anatoly Yudashkin, a Russian physicist, scientist, engineer, and pilot. Now, what you are going to hear will completely amaze you. Mielke asked when he came from Soviet territory to East Germany. He replied that he had not come from the Soviet Union at all. Yudashkin stated that he only learned about the Soviet Union 7 months ago, when he found himself in present-day Germany in an unimaginable way. He also stated that he did not know anything about World War II. He did not know anything about either Hitler or Stalin until 7 months ago. Since he was a scientist, he had a theory that he ended up in East Berlin through a portal. In other words, he directly said that he was from another dimension. Mielke was completely baffled. Before that, Mielke had heard information about unidentified flying objects, and he also knew that the Soviets had taken a huge amount of material from Germany after the end of the war, but he had never heard anything like this before and found it difficult to believe. Mielke continued to ask questions and asked how he suddenly appeared in Berlin. Anatoly said that they were testing a Mars rover in the Budesca Desert in Chile. Mielke took a map and asked him to show where this desert was in Chile. When Anatoly pointed his finger at the place, it was written Atacama Desert. Mielke said that this desert is called the Atacama Desert. Anatoly told him that where he was from, this desert was called the Budesca Desert. Anatoly explained that when they were testing one of the Mars rovers with the Americans in the desert in Chile, after finishing, Anatoly got into his private small electric plane, which he was supposed to fly to Santiago, when he got caught in a terrible storm and his plane broke down after being struck by lightning. He managed to make an emergency landing in a forest 50 kilometers from Berlin, but he does not remember exactly where that forest is, as it was pitch dark. He walked and was picked up by a person in a car and taken to Berlin. For 2 days, he did not understand what environment he was in, as many things were very different, technologically, etc. After reading the newspaper, he realized that he was somewhere else entirely, and that this was not the world he lived in. He was also quite hungry, and even had to steal food from a store. A month later, he also found a job as a worker in a factory to somehow make a living. After work, Anatoly visited the library almost every day and learned a lot. He was already sure that he had gotten caught in a so-called portal storm, during which he was transported to this dimension in which he now found himself. Mielke was interested in how the world was organized in his universe. Yudashkin said that the main powers there were France and the American Democratic Republic, or the USA. There was no Soviet Union, and it was 2050. Russia had a war with China 70 years ago, and China had annexed 40% of Russia's territory. It was considered the #1 power in Asia. There were no countries like Malaysia, New Zealand, and a few other countries. In their place were completely different countries. Many things coincided, many things did not. I plan to release a second video about this event, as there is a lot of material where I will introduce you to even more details.